Hi, my name is Guilherme Cartier. I'm a developer advocate in the core enterprise and Z Cloud engineering organization at Kyndryl. And in today's video, I would like to talk a little bit about Git. This should be a short Git tutorial for mainframers. So this will be our agenda for today. First, we'll cover what is Git. Then we'll talk a little bit about the difference between Git and GitHub. Then we're going to talk about Git in the mainframe business. And finally, we'll talk about the process flow, aka the most common commands that we execute on Git. So what is Git? Git is a free and open source distributed source code management tool designed to handle everything from small to very large projects with a lot of speed and a lot of efficiency. So it is a source code management tool. It's where you store your source code and where you control the version of it. And it was developed by Linus Torvalds. Yes, the same Linus from the Linux. And he developed it in 2005 because he was dissatisfied with the current landscape of the source code management solutions at the time. That's because the tools at the time, they were, in his opinion, very slow, heavy, and didn't have any mechanism to protect the project from data corruption. So he developed Git, if I'm not mistaken, in 2 weeks, and he actually used that to control his work with the Linux kernel. So how Git works under the hood? As I previously said, right, Git is a distributed version control tool, which means that instead of having a working copy in my workstation and relying on a centralized repository, everybody who uses Git and works in the same project has a full repository in their workstation, including all the history of changes and everything. It's not a working copy, it's a complete repository. So this makes the work much more dynamic and much more fluid. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between Git and GitHub. Chances are that if you heard of Git, you probably heard of GitHub. And there's a lot of confusion in this world where people think that they are the same thing where they really are not. So first, right, Git, as we already discussed it is a blazing fast distributed version control tool. It's basically the engine that powers any other Git server. So it's a version control tool. While on the other hand, GitHub, it is a cloud hosting platform for version control that emphasizes collaboration. So it basically lets teams work together, but under the hood, it uses Git. So actually, GitHub uses Git under the hood to make it happen. But it's like a platform where teams can collaborate. It acts as the single source of truth for a specific project, right? And it is worth noting that GitHub is only one example of tools like that. There are many different tools in the market like GitLab, there is Bitbucket, there is the Azure repos, and there are many more. But I believe that GitHub is one of the most famous one. Most of the open source projects are hosted on GitHub. As an example, of course, Zoe is hosted on GitHub as well. And many other famous open source projects are hosted on GitHub as well. Okay, so we talked about Git. Now let's talk about how Git integrates in the mainframe business. Why should I care? So here are listed 3 reasons why, right? Of course, there are many more. So first, the industry is modernizing, and it shouldn't be different for mainframe. The thing is that in the past few years, Git has become the standard source code management solution for application development. And we see a lot of movement towards integrating the development ecosystem, and it shouldn't be different for the mainframe, right? It shouldn't be any reason why mainframers should use a completely different set of tools in order to do application development. Of course, there are some differences, and we'll discuss them, but basically, this is the direction that the industry is going. The second reason is that you don't need to be a developer to leverage Git. We as mainframers, we handle code all the time. It probably not always application code, but we do handle code. It could be JCL, it could be Rex, even configuration file. And all of those things, they can be managed through Git as well. And we could use that to integrate them into a CI/CD pipeline and to order to do automation process with them as well. And last but not least, the digital transformation journey includes several aspects, and one of them is source code management. All right, so since we're talking about Git and the mainframe business, let's talk about how it relates with the traditional source code management solutions at the mainframe, which are the library managers. So the first difference of Git and one of the big advantages of Git is that since it is a distributed version control solution, um, it doesn't rely on a single point of failure, right? Of course, there is a single source of truth for the project, something like GitHub, as we already discussed it, or any other Git server. But if something goes wrong with that, any developer that is actively working in the project will have a full version of the repository in their workstation, and the work can be quickly restored, right? And the second thing is that Git enables parallel development by using branches. And these branches can be later integrated in the main branch of the project without any problem, right? But it's important to highlight one important difference is that traditional library managers in the mainframe, they do much more than only version control. They usually also handle the compilation step, link edit, and the deployment of the application to production. So if you're considering uh, doing source code management in the mainframe using Git, you need to consider what are the solutions that you're going to use to do those other steps, right? How are you going to do your compilation, your link edit? It's going to be through a CI/CD pipeline or what's going to be, right? And another important thing to notice is that as well is that many of the modern library managers in the mainframe have integration plugins for Git servers. So in many cases, if you are using one of those tools, you can delegate the version control of your application to Git, but the library manager will still handle the other steps of your deployment process of the application, right? And if eventually you want to move forward with the CI/CD pipeline, you can do that much easier. All right, so let's talk about the process flow or the most common commands that we execute while we are working with Git. So this is basically just an example of the most common commands. Of course, there are many other commands for Git as well and many variation of the same commands. But these are the most common ones that we usually execute every time that we are working with Git, right? And we will go over each one of those. So first, starting with the Git Init, and as the name suggests, it initializes a Git repository locally. Then we move to Git Add. So whenever we do some changes in our project, like adding a new file or changing something in a file in our project, we need to add that file to what we call the staging area. Then we move to Git Commit. So it basically gets everything that is in the staging area and it commits into the Git log. So it basically means that you are comfortable with the changes and that's what you're adding into the Git log. All right, so far we've been working locally, right? So how can I connect my local repository with a single source of truth, right? Somewhere where I can collaborate with my teammates in the same project, something like GitHub. Basically, we do that using the Git Remote command. And in this example here, we are doing a Git Remote add, and we are adding our remote as calling it origin and passing a URL for the repository on GitHub. Okay, so we initialized our repository. We did some changes. We added those changes into the staging area. We committed those changes. We added a remote repository. Now it's time to move those changes to that remote repository so our teammates can have those changes as well. So we do this using the Git Push command. First, we do the Git Push, and then we pass which remote repository we're doing that, and then we inform which branch we are pushing the changes to. In this case, I'm passing to the master branch. Now, let's say that I just joined the team or I just joined the project, and I need to get up to speed with the code, right? And I need to get the local repository on my workstation so I can work in the project. Well, how we would do something like that? We would do that using the Git Clone command. And what it allows us to do is basically get a full copy of the project locally, including all the history of changes, but from a Git server, right? So in this case, GitHub. So getting the URL for that repository on GitHub, and when I issue the Git Clone command to that URL, it basically copies the entire repository into my workstation. Another scenario would be if I already have the repository locally on my workstation and I simply want to take the latest changes that my teammates did to the code so I can guarantee that I'm always working in the latest version of the code in that specific branch, right? And we would do that using the Git Pull command. The Git Pull command is used to fetch and download the content from the remote repository and immediately update the local repository to match that content. Now, a different scenario would be if I'm working in the project and now I want to work in a new feature, right? But I don't want to mess up with the current development process because this feature might be uh, deleted later or not use it at all, right? So we do that in Git by using branches. And the way that we create branches on Git is by using the git checkout command. Finally, in this example, we have the Git Merge. Is basically where I'm satisfied with all the changes that I did in a separate branch, and I want to merge that into my current branch. And I would do that with the Git Merge command. And that's it. This was a very short introduction to Git. Of course, there's much more to it, especially when we talk about integrating it with the mainframe. So I really encourage you to learn more about it and really play around with it. And that's it for today. Thank you for your time, and I see you next time.